Well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. It's good to be back with you. Appreciate all the work that you guys have done over the last 44 days, 45 now almost, keeping Utahns informed. So we appreciate that. We appreciate the fair reporting from most of you, and it's been a great session. We're excited to talk about it. We had a lot of priorities that we started off with at the first of the session. You guys are aware of that. I think it's important to note that it was interesting as we sat down with the Senate and with the governor's office. We had a lot of similar priorities. In fact, especially with the Senate, it was almost our priorities matched up and aligned with their priorities. And so we've really appreciated the working relationship that we've had with the Senate as well as the governor's office. Those of you that follow other states know that this is a little bit unique what we have in Utah. And we're proud of it. And I think our system is set up a little bit differently than most states. And it does allow for better collaboration. So especially when you see the budget process play out. It's interesting. I was talking to a speaker from another state not too long ago, and they talked about how the House sends a budget over, the Senate sends a budget over, and back and forth, and then they argue it out. And I think the way we do it is a lot better, where we take a more collaborative approach, where we put members from the whole legislature on our subcommittees, and then we work together throughout the whole session to do it collaboratively. And so we're very proud of that. I think, again, the collaboration, I think, amongst both the majority caucus and the minority caucus, we try to be open, we try to be fair, and you look at the majority of the bills passed this year, and most of them were bipartisan. And so I think that shows a lot, says a lot about the state of Utah overall. But I'll tell you, as being Speaker, I recognize now more than I have ever the sacrifices that the members make to be up here, whether you're from the majority caucus or from the minority caucus. It is a huge sacrifice to be up here, and whether it's with their work or their family life, and I just appreciate everyone, appreciate all those involved. And I hope you guys report on this a little bit. Our staff is amazing, and the sacrifices that they make, especially our legislative staff, our nonpartisan legislative staff. They work harder than probably most of the senators and the representatives during the session, and they are phenomenal. And it's really impressive to see lawmakers on both sides of the aisle praise our staff and the same members. They work in a very productive and professional manner, and they are part of the reason, if not one of the biggest reasons, why Utah is the #1 state in so many areas. And so we just want to give a huge shout out to them, and I hope you guys publicly do that, because they deserve the credit. So, a couple of our top priorities, you guys know, tax cuts. Roughly ended up being pretty dang close to $170 million this year. 10 points reduction on 10 basis point reduction on the income tax, dropping it down to 4.55, as well as expanding the child care tax credit to families, and we're proud of that. It's our 4th year in a row, consecutive year in a row, cumulatively, and if the voters pass the sales tax on food at the ballot in November, that'll be over $1.5 billion in tax cuts over the last 4 years. That adds up significantly, and it makes a difference in people's wallets and in their budgets, and especially as we're seeing inflation, while it has slowed, it's still higher than most people expected. And so, interest rates are high, and it's affecting everyone. And so it's important, I think, for us to recognize that. It's one of the biggest things I've heard about over the last couple of years from my constituents, is the cost of goods and services and food continuing to rise, so it's important. You guys know, you watched us, we've made significant investments in water this session. The Great Salt Lake bill is finally done and passed all the way through the session. I think that will be one of the biggest impacts on the lake itself, that bill. And so we're super excited about that. SB 211, it will be a game changer. Maybe for us, maybe we'll see it in our lifetime, but more importantly, for our kids and our grandkids. And so, you know, it'll be a several-year process to accomplish some of the things that we need to accomplish with water in this state, and that's laying the groundwork and building upon the groundwork that we have already done. It's no secret, you guys have known this, and the Senate and the governor's office is lockstep with me on this and pushing back on the federal overreach from our federal government. We have done that, and it's important that we continue to do that. The energy bill, I don't know if any of you watched that play out this afternoon or this morning on the House floor, but people are passionate about it, and it is important to our state that we continue to protect our reliable, dispatchable resources or energy. I'll never forget the day when I sat down with Rocky Mountain Power and said, okay, federal government's trying to shut down our coal power plants. You guys are talking about it. What's your plan to replace it? Crickets. Well, we don't know yet. We're going to figure it out. I'm like, well, that's 8-9 years away. What do you mean you don't have a plan? Well, we're going to keep talking about it. We're going to, so I'm grateful to them, to be honest with you, to Rocky Mountain Power for their willingness to work with the state of Utah to keep our energy rates #1 lowest in the nation. We are really proud of that. When we started this session, we were talking about being the 3rd lowest power rates in the nation. As you guys know and reported on, Utah is now the lowest in the nation. And that is in a large part due to the fact of the work that the state has already done. If the state of Utah and the legislature hadn't have pushed back on the federal government on the OTR ruling, we know that we would, one, not have the power that we need. 2, this is according to Rocky Mountain Power, our costs of power in this state would be 30 to 40% higher than what they otherwise would have been. And so those things would start to be implemented right now because it was at the end of 2026. The money would be started to be increased on our power rates in order to make those investments and those purchases to meet those requirements. We're fortunate that the court put the stay on that, and so we're allowed to work through the lawsuit on that. We're confident in that lawsuit that we will prevail, and so it's important that we continue to push back on the federal government and the Biden administration overreach into our state, and we're continuing to do that on multiple fronts. Another huge year in investments in water and transportation. I don't know if any of you guys caught this, but we made another significant investment in transit. We know as we continue to grow in the state of Utah that we're not going to be able to do it with just roads. And so transit is going to be an important part going into the future. It's important, I believe, for us to be ahead of that and lay the groundwork and continue to build on it so that we're not caught flat-footed and we're not caught behind. And so it'll continue to be a priority. We'll continue to make those investments. Representative Brown, do you have anything before we open it up to questions? Or?
Just a couple things. On the energy front, if our energy prices go up, that's the most aggressive tax we can have. That's one of the biggest things that would feed into inflation. By keeping our energy rates low, we keep everything at a lower price, and that's one of the biggest pressures that we're getting from citizens who are really hurting because of the inflationary pressures that we're seeing in our economy right now. Additionally, on transit, last year we implemented the 5th of a 5th tax. That's starting to go into effect, but we've also invested a huge amount of money into double tracking of Front Runner and other transit programs some of the reason why we do that is, we're not just trying to provide the basic rights, but we're also trying to provide a basis for opportunity within our state so that people have the opportunity to go and build their lives in a way that isn't, that we're providing the, if you look at our country, we are an amazing country because we got our communication infrastructure, our transportation infrastructure, and our clean water and those basic utilities in place 50 years before any other developed country. That's a big reason why the United States of America is in the position of strength that they're in. As a state of Utah, if we don't pay attention to those infrastructure needs at this level, we're going to be hurting down the line. And when we look at water, people always ask, how are we going to, especially in the drought years, they were asking, how are we going to be in the drought years? And I'd always say, well, there's two things that before anything that we do, we need to acknowledge. Number one, a lot of this is weather, and so having rain makes a big difference. But number two, we have all of our ancestors that built these water projects that have the reservoirs, up in the mountains that really saved our bacon through that drought. And so, we owe a lot to those who came before us. And really, we're just trying to continue laying that groundwork for the future.
I think that's super important. I think that's one of the things that has continued to make Utah one of the best states in the nation is we don't just try to solve today's problems, but we look into the future. And we're so fortunate that those who came before us did the same thing. So.
And then the other thing that I would add is, we continue to invest in our students, teachers, and our education system. This year we've added over $600 million to our education budget. We continue to do that over the past, since I came into the legislature, I'm a little newer, since 2019, we have significantly increased our education funding. We continue to make those investments into our future through our education programs.
Well, that's a great point, Representative Brandman. This session, one of our top priorities is that we put students, parents, and teachers first. And if you look at some of the legislation that we passed, Representative Birkeland's bill, increasing the money that goes directly to the teachers into the classrooms, it was a huge success. You look at, we increased in the budget the teacher prep days, and so we again, and that's on top of another significant raise in the WPU spending. So with that, let's get to any questions.
Representative Brammer, why introduce the intent language on SB 240, and do you anticipate it will impact KSL's case to try to obtain Attorney General Reyes's calendars?
Well, we'll certainly leave whatever the judges do to the judges, but we have seen that the judges are oftentimes looking to what we say on the floor and in debate, sometimes even more closely than what we put in the bills. And so, introducing the intent language really is, the point of that is just to say what our intent is.
I want to just say the long-standing intent of the legislature has been that. We have a history of inside the legislature. That's been our prerogative. The daily calendar is not open to public record.
So you're admitting you're putting your thumb on the scale in that case.
I would add one other thing. It's, on the daily calendars, one of the big concerns is those the daily calendar has always been in the statute. That's not a government record act. And that's how we've always treated it. But one of the things that is also not there is a restriction on forward calendars. Now that's a security concern. In fact, this week we already received requests for calendars for future calendars. That's a really big deal when we receive death threats pretty frequently up here. And they're asking for where we're going to be at times where there will not be police presence or others. Like when we're up here at the Capitol, we have the Highway Patrol that are, for the forward calendars that let us know. This is a security issue as much as anything at this point because they're already asking for future calendars.
And some of the ladies in our body receive some of the most death threats. And so it's been the longest-standing intent of the legislature, clarifying that. It is a safety issue and it's important. So, other questions?
On the Great Salt Lake.
Yeah.
You did pass some significant legislation, but can you guarantee that anything that you've accomplished actually gets water to the lake and fills it back up? Because the problem remains, you have a lake that's drying up and you need water.
Yes, we can guarantee some of that because some of the restrictions, they're not restrictions, but some of the incentives that we put in place with optimization and conservation measures that we put in place, that water has no place to go but downhill and end up in the Great Salt Lake. So certainly that can be guaranteed. We're going through the process to look to try to find ways how we can identify a lot of that because it's important because Representative Snyder just passed the bill that separates that water and says it can't be can't be used by the mineral companies. And another thing we can guarantee is that there will be less water taken out of the Great Salt Lake going into the future with the passage of that bill. So again, I think that's been that bill. I think it was 435 was one of the biggest and most impactful bills.
But what more do you see that you need to do, or are you just going to let this sit?
Yeah, well, it's one of them things that you can't take your foot off the pedal on. We have to continue to look and find ways to improve, and we're going to continue to do that. It's a top priority for me. You guys know that. It's a top priority for former Speaker Wilson. He's the one that started this, and it's a top priority for our Republican caucus. And we're grateful for the partnership we have in that with the Minority Caucus, and it's one of the areas we've worked really close on. Representative Owens, that guy has been amazing at going and helping do research, helping us find ideas, working with us. And so it's one of the, I think, one of the things that I am so proud of this year with the legislature is our willingness to work together on some of those things.
Speaker Schultz, this session, the governor's budget recommendations for housing weren't able to materialize, but lawmakers have worked with his office to develop some creative ways to incentivize housing construction. So what is your statement on what the legislature has done as far as affordable housing in the state, which is a crisis right now?
You know, couple things. One of the things that we did too, we increased some of the housing stuff in this last budget round, and so there's been a little more added just in the last 24 hours or so, which I think is good. But a lot of it is the policies that I think that we put in place, and actually given more additional tools to the cities to help create some of those opportunities for home ownership. That's what I think is probably the most exciting, and then actually incentivizing the cities to actually do that. Again, this is all voluntary by the cities, and so we look to them. They're our partners. We look to them to make sure that they step up and implement some of these policies. It will be up to them to do that, but now they will have more tools in their toolboxes to accomplish the needs of the state.
So your Minority Leader Angela Romero had some complimentary words for you about your collaboration and openness, but she also said she felt this was her toughest session, given the number of bills she felt were purely political rather than policy and culture wars. How would you respond to her concerns about that?
Well, I can tell you, as you guys know, I have the utmost respect, not just for Representative Romero, but almost all of the Minority Caucus. They're great people, and they are here trying to do the right things, just like most lawmakers are. Obviously, we have some different opinions on policy. I would suggest, I think that the majority of Utahns appreciate those bills that we passed. I understand and recognize that they represent a different constituency, and it was hard for them. But I still believe that it was the right thing to do moving forward, and I appreciate their willingness to continue to still work together with us, despite those tough disagreements.
Mr. Speaker, you.
Brown, you have anything on that?
Yeah, just, you know, so in my role, I read all of the bills and I work through those, and I will tell you that you know, I worked with a lot of the Minority Caucus, and we have a great working relationship. I've enjoyed working with them this year more than any other year, and they've been fair to us, and I think that we've been fair to them as much as possible. There are some division lines that are always going to be there in partisan politics, but it's been, at least from my perspective, roughly about the same as most years. But you're on the last week of session, and everybody's a little bit beaten down, a little worn down. But I think that as we look at it, as we get another week or two out and look back, it's going to feel pretty similar to most of the other ones in terms of partisanship. But I will say, every single member of both the minority and the majority caucus, I really believe that they're here because they absolutely love the state. And they're fighting for what they think is right. And it's a great place for all of that to be aired out in the legislature.
I just want to add one thing to this, because I've been watching the board, and we'll know in a couple weeks when the Adam Brown statistics come out. But I'll tell you, I think there's been more bipartisan votes this year than at any other point in time. So it's interesting. We'll see in a couple weeks when that comes out. And on both sides, I think we've seen more, more votes taken by the Republican side with the Democrats, and I think we've seen more Democrats taking side with the Republicans this year. So we'll see when those come out in a couple of weeks.
Mr. Speaker,
So, yeah.
So some things at the Capitol, I think, take a long time. Medicaid expansion is a good example, very important program that took years. But this year with NHL, Major League Baseball, and the Jazz, shiny new things seem to go right through. So for people who have discomfort with that, what do you say?
Well, I want to say that the baseball stuff's been talked about for a year and a half or so, and there's been a lot of work go into that. And if it doesn't materialize, it doesn't happen. And the thing that I like most about the baseball stuff is it pays for itself, right? The revenue, the bill that we passed, it pays for itself. And so if baseball doesn't show up, then the money doesn't happen. If baseball does show up, it's baseball that pays for baseball. And so I feel like that was a great compromise and a great way forward. I actually like it better than where we started. That's part of the process. With hockey, that totally changed, 180 from where it was at before the session started and during the first part of the session, and now is turning into a whole rebuild of our downtown city. I am super excited about that. I don't know if most of you saw the press release from the LDS Church, but we're talking about doing a total rebuild, or the Salt Lake County and Salt Lake City are talking about doing a total rebuild of the Salt Palace, maybe a Bravenel Hall, working together with the church. They're talking about plans to redo what they have downtown. And you know what? Hockey and basketball just happen to be part of that. But that's where the focus really is on, is rebuilding our downtown. I can tell you that there is grave concern going into this session, losing the Jazz out of downtown Salt Lake, and maybe even out of the state of Utah down the road. That would have been detrimental, in my opinion, to Utah as a whole, including downtown Salt Lake. And so I'm really excited about the pathway forward. It lets Salt Lake City make the determination and Salt Lake County make the determination, and then has some additional legislative oversight to make sure the priorities of the state are put in place.
Do you have assurances from the Jazz that they stay downtown?
That's part of this legislation.
That's part of the deal.
That's part of this
They
deal.
have to stay.
They would have to stay. So, other questions? Yes.
It's an election year.
Yeah.
How do you think that's influenced this session?
You know what? Election years always influence the session, especially here in the House. We're the closest to the people, right? Every 2 years, we run every 2 years. We're up for re-election every 2 years. It affects us every year. It's interesting to see, moving up the filing deadline. I think there's some pros with that. There's probably some cons with it. But overall, I think, it's an election year, and they're always a little bit different. So
What are the pros and the cons?
that's probably for me getting too far into the weeds. But Representative, you have any thoughts on that?
I think it will oftentimes depend on the individual legislator. There are some that are going to be a little more, they'll go with the pure vote in their area, and there's others that are they're here on more of just like, this is how I am and this is how I'm going to vote. There's some dynamics with lame duck candidates who know they're not going to be up here, and everyone else does too now. It used to be that the last week of the session, or maybe shortly after, you find out who's not coming back, and everybody kept it pretty quiet. We all know, and that's a different dynamic. And I don't know that it's better or worse, it's different.
It's different.
But
It's different, and I think, we had to do that really, I think, when we moved up our primary. So when we moved up to primary, we had to move up the filing deadline, and so that's one of the things. And well, I'm sure we'll continue to have conversations about it and reassess it after the fact and see if it's a good idea or bad idea. But I personally think it's probably good at this point in time.
Speaker,
There
we have to
were
get
a
to
lot
Senate
of,
bill, so one more
Katie,
question.
Katie, you had a
I was
question.
going to ask a bit more about housing, about how much of an impact you actually think it'll make. I know you have to balance with cities and towns, and
Yeah.
a lot of those bills they're fine with, but at the same time, not a ton of extra subsidy for certain housing programs that the governor asked for. And will that actually make an impact sooner rather than later, rather than, these
Yeah.
are city issues that'll take years to build
Well,
housing development.
There's several issues that relate to and drive up the cost of housing. The number one thing right now that is driving it and has driven up housing in the state of Utah is the fact that we're, I think, 35,000, 34,000 houses under supply in the state of Utah. So it's a supply and demand issue. So if you look at everything that we've done this year is to work to give cities the tools that they need to do what's best for their city and do what's best for our kids and give them the opportunities to increase the supply for home ownership.
Will they though, without?
We're hopeful they do, and I've been told by several cities they're actually excited about some of the things. So I think it will. Will it have an impact? I truly believe it will. Will it solve the problem? Yet to be seen.
I'll give you
Oh,
two things that I hope that you'll keep an eye out for. We have about 190,000 entitled home lots right now that aren't being built, and that's also a cost issue due to labor and cost of supplies. So one of the things that we've done to help with that is modular housing and allowing for inspection so that homes can largely be built elsewhere and then assembled on site. That has a potential to decrease cost by 20 to 30%. That would be a huge win, and that's a revolutionary thing for the state of Utah before other states. The second thing are these infrastructure districts that allow for a decrease in the interest rate to also drive the cost down. That allows it to pencil for the builders. That's why they're not building, because it's not penciling out for them. And it allows them to be bought by homeowners who can hopefully, it can come into the range of affordability for those homeowners.
Without a cost to the taxpayer.
Yeah.
So, Ben,
You began by talking about all your successes. Do you have any regrets?
I haven't thought about that yet. I have regrets every day. So there's a lot of them, Ben. I don't know what we all make mistakes. I made a few mistakes throughout the year. I'm not going to be shy about that. To think about it off the top of my head,
Anything you wish had passed that didn't pass, or anything that you wish you didn't run?
Well, if I wished that we didn't run it, we probably would have recalled it by now, right? So there's a few things that I obviously personally would have liked to not see passed that have passed, but nothing really that stands out. And there will be a few that I'm disappointed that hasn't passed, that don't pass. So.
Like what?
Well, that's yet to be seen. We'll see.
Well,
So.
and I would say this, there's always a few bills that you personally would like to see pass or not go forward. However, what I would say is I have learned that the process that it goes through almost always is better than one individual's preference on something. And so, there will always be something that you wish you could have gotten or not, but the process, I trust that process a whole lot more than I trust my own intuition on a bill-by-bill basis.
We got a lot of.
I'll tell you what, we can follow up with you on those questions.
We're still-
Follow
Yeah,
up
we're
with all of
still-
us on those if you
Yeah.
would. And
Last question.
Real quick, there were a number of election bills this session, some that would have made it, would have really affected Utah's vote by mail system that's been in place for a long time, and some others, ranked choice voting is one of the few that actually got a hearing and then was voted down. Is that because you're not interested you're happy with overall with how the election system is run in the state? Or is that something to deal with in another session?
Well, I'm personally disappointed that the ranked choice voting failed, honestly. I think election integrity is important to me. You guys know this. I filed the audit for election, for elections. I passed the bill last year that would audit all of our elections. And I think adding that additional security or check is good because I think it helps people work harder to stay focused and make sure they're doing their job right. But also, I think it gives people the peace of mind as well to know that there's an audit over it. When we talk about ranked choice voting, that's one that I'm disappointed that didn't pass because it adds into the mix a whole bunch of other layers that just make it confusing and harder for the voters to understand. So in my eyes, that is one step that erodes election integrity because it's confusing to people and they don't understand it. When you don't understand it, people question it, and so that was one area that I was a little bit
After the
We
changes
have to be
last
done. I'm
year,
so
though,
sorry
were
for
you
the
satisfied with the, are you satisfied with the way the state runs universal vote by mail? You want to stick with that?
Well, for me personally, I'm one that's always been for in-person voting, but I am confident that Utah has some of the best in the nation as far as vote by mail. So, yeah, and I think that the audit proved that. So, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.